Step into Rose Hill Park, a grand English estate where roses hide deadly secrets. When a trusted solicitor is found stabbed in the heart of a secluded maze, Hercule Poirot arrives to unravel a web of betrayal, greed, and hidden pasts. A stolen sapphire brooch, cryptic letters, and fragile alibis point to a killer among the elegant guests, each with a motive, each with a lie. As Poirot's little grey cells unravel the truth, one question lingers. Who struck the fatal blow under the cover of night? Dive into a mystery where every clue blooms with danger. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Rose Hill. The late September sun cast a mellow glow through the tall windows of Hercule Poirot's London flat, where order and symmetry reigned supreme. His morning routine, sipping a fragrant tisane, adjusting the angle of a silver letter opener to align precisely with the edge of his desk, had been interrupted by the arrival of the post. Among the usual correspondence lay an envelope of fine cream vellum, embossed with the crest of the Langston family. Poirot, with a flick of his manicured fingers, slit it open and read the elegant script of Lady Eleanor Langston, a widow whose name carried whispers of old wealth and quiet influence. She invited him to Rose Hill Park, her Cotswolds estate, for a weekend to celebrate her nephew's engagement. Yet, beneath the gracious words, a note of disquiet emerged. Certain matters have arisen, Monsieur Poirot, which require a mind as discerning as yours. Poirot's moustache twitched with anticipation. A puzzle, perhaps. He penned a courteous acceptance, his curiosity alight. The journey to Rose Hill was a study in English charm. The train wound through fields ablaze with autumn's fiery palette, crimson, amber, and gold, while Poirot, in his immaculate suit, contemplated the vagaries of human nature. At the station, a chauffeur in livery awaited, ushering him into a gleaming Rolls-Royce that purred toward the estate. Rose Hill Park unfolded like a painting, sprawling lawns framed by ancient oaks, a labyrinth of rose hedges fragrant in the crisp air, and a Georgian mansion whose stone facade exuded both grandeur and secrets. The butler, Mr. Grayson, greeted Poirot at the entrance, his posture rigid as a sentinel's, though his eyes betrayed a fleeting shadow of unease. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice a model of decorum. "Lady Eleanor awaits you in the drawing-room." The drawing-room was a symphony of elegance, polished mahogany, crystal chandeliers, and portraits of stern Langston ancestors gazing down. Lady Eleanor, a woman of perhaps 60, rose to greet him. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her eyes, sharp and blue, held both warmth and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot, your presence honours us," she said, her smile gracious but strained. She introduced the assembled guests with practised ease. Charles Langston, her nephew, was a broad-shouldered man in his 30s, his laugh hearty but his manner restless, as if energy bubbled beneath his tailored jacket. His fiancée, Miss Clara Beaumont, was a striking woman with auburn hair and the poised intensity of an actress, accustomed to commanding attention. Dr. Henry Walsh, the family physician, was a lean figure with a reserved demeanour, his spectacles glinting as he offered a curt nod. Mrs. Violet Marwood, a widowed cousin, fluttered about with a fan and a penchant for pointed remarks cloaked in sweetness. Lastly, Mr. Reginald Tate, the family solicitor, was a wiry man whose nervous fingers toyed with a pocket watch, his glances darting like a cornered animal's. Dinner was served in a dining room aglow with candlelight, the table laden with pheasant, fine china, and the weight of unspoken tensions. Charles dominated the conversation, his voice booming with plans to modernize Rose Hill's farmland into a lucrative venture. "The future lies in progress, Aunt Eleanor," he declared, slicing his meat with vigour. Lady Eleanor's lips tightened, her preference for tradition evident in her measured response. The estate has thrived for centuries without such upheaval, Charles. Clara, with a performer's grace, steered the talk to lighter topics, her laughter bright but her eyes watchful. Mrs. Marwood, sipping her claret, dropped barbed hints about Clara's theatrical background, murmuring that the stage was hardly a respectable calling. Clara's smile never wavered, though her fingers gripped her fork a fraction tighter. Dr. Walsh ate in silence, his gaze flickering toward Tate, who spilled a drop of wine in his haste to change the subject. Poirot, observing all, noted the undercurrents, the clink of glass, the forced pleasantries, the secrets lurking in every pause. As coffee was served, Lady Eleanor drew Poirot aside to a quiet alcove. Her voice lowered. She confided the true reason for his invitation. 2 weeks ago, a sapphire brooch, a family heirloom of great value, vanished from my safe. Only a few have access, and I cannot believe it was an outsider. Her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief. I fear disloyalty in my own house, Monsieur Poirot. Will you help me? Poirot inclined his head, his eyes gleaming with purpose. Rest assured, madame, the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot are at your service. As he returned to the guests, the firelight casting long shadows, he felt the familiar thrill of a mystery unfolding, one that promised to test even his formidable intellect. Chapter 2. The Body in the Rose Garden. The dawn at Rosehill Park broke with a deceptive serenity, the first rays of sunlight gilding the dew-kissed roses that wound through the estate's famed maze. Hercule Poirot, ever an early riser, stood at his window, adjusting his tie with mathematical precision while his mind replayed the previous evening's dinner. The strained smiles, the veiled barbs, the nervous tick of Mr. Reginald Tate's fingers on his pocket watch. The sapphire brooch's theft, confided by Lady Eleanor, was a tantalizing puzzle, but Poirot sensed deeper currents beneath the household's polished surface. His musings were shattered by a scream, high and piercing, slicing through the morning's calm like a shard of glass. He moved swiftly, his small frame belying his agility, and followed the sound to the gardens. The household was already converging, drawn by the cry. Mr. Grayson, the butler, led the way, his face ashen beneath his usual composure, guiding Poirot and the others through the labyrinth of rose hedges. The air was heavy with the scent of blooms, their crimson and white petals glistening in the early light. At the heart of the maze, where paths converged in a circular clearing, a grim tableau awaited. Reginald Tate, the solicitor, lay sprawled on the grass, his eyes wide in a frozen stare, a dagger buried to its hilt in his chest. Blood stained his waistcoat, a stark contrast to the pristine surroundings. The roses, undisturbed, framed the scene as if mocking its violence. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands hovering but not touching, his eyes scanning every detail with the precision of a watchmaker. The dagger was ornate, its handle carved with ivy motifs, unmistakably part of Rosehill's collection. The wound was singular, clean, and deliberate, suggesting a killer of steady hand and resolute intent. The grass bore no footprints, the dew unbroken save for the narrow path where Tate had fallen. Poirot's moustache twitched as he noted the absence of struggle, no torn clothing, no defensive marks. The solicitor had been taken by surprise, or perhaps he had known his killer too well to fear them. The guests, gathered at the clearing's edge, reacted with a spectrum of horror. Lady Eleanor clutched her shawl, her face pale but composed, her eyes betraying a flicker of dread. Charles Langston swore under his breath, his fists clenched, his earlier bravado replaced by a raw edge of fear. Clara Beaumont, the actress, stood rigid, her hands pressed to her lips, though her eyes darted with a calculating sharpness that Poirot noted. Dr. Henry Walsh, the physician, stepped forward, his professional instincts overriding his shock. But Poirot waved him back. "Non, monsieur, We must preserve the scene for the authorities. Mrs. Violet Marwood, ever the dramatist, let out a theatrical gasp, fanning herself as she murmured about dreadful omens. Grayson, hovering nearby, maintained his stoic demeanour, though his fingers trembled as he adjusted his cuffs. Within the hour, Inspector Harrow arrived, a stout man with a ruddy face and a moustache that rivaled Poirot's in volume, if not in elegance. His blustering manner suggested a preference for action over deduction, and he surveyed the scene with a mix of dismay and deference. "A nasty business, Monsieur Poirot," he said, mopping his brow. "Murder, plain as day, but in this maze. The killer could have slipped away like a ghost." He barked orders to his constable, a young man named Perkins, who fumbled with his notebook, then turned to Poirot. "I've heard of your methods, sir. Care to lend a hand?" Poirot inclined his head, his eyes gleaming. "Mais oui, Inspector. Hercule Poirot is at your disposal." The inspector's men cordoned off the clearing, though their heavy boots threatened to trample what little evidence remained. Poirot, with a quiet word, ensured the dagger was left untouched until he could examine it further. He questioned Grayson first, the butler's precision a comfort to his orderly mind. Grayson confirmed that the dagger came from a display case in the library, accessible to all but rarely handled. The household had retired by midnight, he said, and the maze's seclusion made it unlikely for an outsider to navigate without detection. "The gates are locked at night, sir," Grayson added, "and the groundskeepers report no breaches." Poirot nodded, filing away the butler's steady gaze and the faint quiver in his voice. Turning to the guests, Poirot began his inquiries with Charles Langston, whose flushed face suggested both grief and agitation. "Tate and I had words last night," Charles admitted, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. "He was meddling in my plans for the estate, said selling the land would ruin the family name. But I didn't kill him, Poirot. I was in my room by 11, dead to the world." His eyes, however, avoided Poirot's, and his fingers twitched as if longing for a cigarette. Clara, questioned next, was a study in composure, her voice steady despite her pallor. "I was rehearsing lines in my room," she said, her actress's poise intact. "I heard nothing until the scream this morning." Yet her hands, clasped tightly, betrayed a tension that intrigued Poirot. Dr. Walsh, when approached, was curt, his spectacles reflecting the morning light. "I was in my room, preparing notes for a patient in the village," he said, his tone clipped. Poirot's raised eyebrow prompted a defensive addendum. "I often work late, monsieur. Medicine does not keep regular hours." Mrs. Marwood, eager to contribute, leaned forward with a conspiratorial whisper. "Mr. Tate was not what he seemed, Monsieur Poirot. Always poking into things, finances, secrets. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd crossed someone dangerous." Her eyes gleamed with relish, but she offered no specifics, only vague insinuations. Lady Eleanor, last to be questioned, stood apart, her gaze fixed on the roses. "This is a tragedy," she said softly. "First my brooch, now this. I cannot help but think they are linked, Monsieur Poirot." Her voice held a quiet conviction, and Poirot, stroking his moustache, agreed to explore the connection. He returned to the body, now covered with a sheet, as Inspector Harrow's men awaited the coroner. The dagger, still embedded, was a focal point. Poirot requested its careful removal for examination, noting its weight and balance. Designed for display, yet lethal in practiced hands. He paced the clearing, his small feet careful to avoid the dew, reconstructing the scene in his mind. The maze's design, with its high hedges and twisting paths, ensured privacy. Only someone familiar with its layout could move swiftly and unseen. The absence of footprints suggested the killer had approached along the same path as Tate, perhaps luring him to the clearing under a pretext. The wound's precision hinted at skill, or at least confidence, and the lack of struggle implied trust, or betrayal. Poirot's attention shifted to the guests' alibis, none of which were ironclad. Charles's claim of retiring early relied on his word alone, and his argument with Tate suggested motive. Clara's rehearsal story was plausible, but her theatrical training made her adept at deception, a fact Poirot tucked away. Dr. Walsh's late-night work raised questions, especially given his evasive manner. Mrs. Marwood's gossip, while irritating, hinted at Tate's involvement in sensitive matters, possibly financial. Lady Eleanor's insistence on the brooch's relevance gnawed at Poirot. Its theft 2 weeks prior seemed a separate crime, yet the timing of Tate's death felt too coincidental. He requested a tour of the library where the dagger had last been seen. The room was a haven of leather-bound books and polished oak, its display case now conspicuously empty. Grayson confirmed that the case was unlocked, a tradition of trust in the household, though he admitted it was perhaps unwise. Poirot examined the case, noting faint scratches around the lock, too subtle for a forced entry, but suggestive of tampering. A nearby window, overlooking the gardens, was slightly ajar, its latch loose. Poirot's eyes narrowed. An insider could have used it to slip out, though the maze's distance made timing critical. Returning to the maze, Poirot walked its paths, his mind mapping the routes. The clearing was accessible by 3 entrances, each obscured by dense hedges. He timed the walk from the house, 5 minutes at a brisk pace, less for someone running. The killer, he reasoned, had planned the act, knowing Tate would be alone. But why the maze? Its isolation was ideal, but its complexity risked exposure unless the killer knew it intimately. Poirot paused, his gaze lingering on a single rose petal, caught in a hedge, its edge bruised. He plucked it, slipping it into an envelope for later scrutiny. Inspector Harrow, meanwhile, was interrogating the groundskeepers, who reported no strangers on the estate. "It's got to be one of them," he muttered to Poirot, gesturing at the house. "But motive, that's the devil of it." Poirot smiled faintly. "The motive, Inspector, lies in the heart of the victim's life. Mr. Tate was a solicitor, a keeper of secrets. We must uncover what he knew, and who feared his knowledge." Harrow grunted, clearly preferring a simpler culprit, but he left Poirot to his methods. As noon approached, the household retreated indoors, the air thick with suspicion. Poirot lingered in the maze, his mind a whirl of details. The dagger's origin, the petal's bruise, the alibi's fragility. He recalled Tate's nervous demeanour at dinner, his fingers on the pocket watch, his glances at Dr. Walsh. Had Tate been anticipating danger? Or was he, too, a player in a deeper game? The brooch, Poirot mused, might be a key, not just to wealth, but to betrayal. He resolved to examine Tate's room next, certain that the solicitor's possessions held clues to his demise. The morning's calm had vanished, replaced by a palpable dread that clung to Rosehill Park like mist. Poirot, standing alone in the maze, felt the weight of the task ahead. The little grey cells, as ever, were his allies, and he would deploy them with relentless precision to unravel the truth hidden among the roses. Chapter 3. The Threads of Motive. The morning's grim discovery in the rose maze cast a pall over Rosehill Park, its elegance now tainted by the spectre of murder. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the household's unease, pursued his investigation with the precision of a chess master, his mind weaving the scattered threads of evidence into a pattern only his little grey cells could discern. The rain had begun to fall, a soft drizzle that cloaked the estate in a silvery haze, and Poirot, clad in a meticulously pressed overcoat, stood beneath the library's window, studying the loose latch he had noted earlier. The murderer, he reasoned, had relied on intimate knowledge of the estate, its routines, its secrets, and perhaps its very architecture. But what drove them to plunge a dagger into Reginald Tate's heart? That was the question that burned in Poirot's mind as he began his deeper inquiries. He requested access to Tate's room, a modest guest chamber on the second floor, its furnishings austere compared to the mansion's grandeur. The room was tidy, almost unnaturally so, suggesting either Tate's fastidious nature or a careful effort to obscure traces of his activities. Poirot's keen eyes scanned the space, a suitcase neatly packed, a fountain pen aligned with a notepad on the desk, and a faint smell of charred paper lingering in the air. In the fireplace, he found the remnants of a burned letter, its edges curled like blackened petals. Using a pair of tweezers, he retrieved a fragment, deciphering the words, "repay or face ruin," in a looping script. The rest was ash, but the phrase was a spark to Poirot's imagination. Blackmail, debt, a betrayal of trust. He pocketed the fragment, certain it held a key to Tate's fate. Next, he examined a leather-bound ledger on the desk, its pages filled with cryptic entries, sums, dates, and abbreviations that hinted at financial transactions tied to the Langston estate. One entry, dated a month prior, read CL $10,000 deferred, followed by a question mark. Charles Langston, perhaps. Poirot's moustache twitched as he considered the implications. Tate, as the family solicitor, had access to sensitive records. Had he uncovered or orchestrated something that made him a target? Poirot resolved to cross-reference the ledger with the estate's accounts, but first he needed to probe the human elements of the puzzle. He summoned Charles Langston to the library where the fire crackled, casting shadows across the oak-panelled walls. Charles entered, his earlier bravado dimmed, his eyes red-rimmed as if sleep had eluded him. "Monsieur Langston," Poirot began, his voice calm but piercing, "you admitted to a disagreement with Mr. Tate last night. Pray, enlighten me as to its nature." Charles shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "It was about the estate," he said. "I want to sell off some land, modernize, bring in revenue. Tate was dead against it, said it'd tie up the family's legacy in legal knots. He was always meddling, poking into my plans." His tone grew heated, but he caught himself, adding, "I didn't kill him, Poirot. I was angry, yes, but I went to bed after we argued." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this argument, it took place where?" Charles hesitated. "In the billiard room, after dinner. Just the two of us." Poirot noted the lack of witnesses, filing it away like a card in a mental index. Clara Beaumont was next, her entrance as poised as a stage performance, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor. She sat with the grace of one accustomed to scrutiny, her auburn hair catching the firelight. "Mademoiselle Beaumont," Poirot said, "you claim you were rehearsing lines in your room last night. Yet I observe you are a woman of precision, of discipline. Is it not curious that you heard nothing? No footsteps, no voices, when a murder occurred so near?" Clara's smile was tight. "I was absorbed in my work, monsieur. The script is demanding, and I block out distractions." She paused, then added, "Reginald did speak to me earlier, though. He warned me about Charles, said he was impulsive, not to be trusted with the estate's future." Her voice held a note of reluctance, as if the admission cost her. Poirot leaned forward. "And this warning, it troubled you?" Clara's eyes met his, steady but guarded. "It made me think, that's all. But I didn't see him again after dinner." Poirot sensed a half-truth, her actress's skill masking something deeper. Dr. Henry Walsh proved less forthcoming. His lean frame was tense as he stood by the window, his spectacles reflecting the grey light outside. "Doctor," Poirot began, "your alibi is that you were working late, preparing notes for a village patient. Yet you seem reluctant to provide details. Who was this patient?" Walsh adjusted his glasses, a nervous tick. "A private matter, monsieur. A villager with a chronic condition. I was reviewing their case." Poirot's smile was disarming but relentless. And this villager, they can confirm your visit? Walsh's jaw tightened. I didn't visit them last night. I was preparing notes, as I said. Poirot's gaze lingered, noting the doctor's discomfort. A lie, perhaps, or a truth carefully curated. He would verify later. Mrs. Violet Marwood, ever eager for the spotlight, swept into the library with a rustle of silk and a cloud of lavender scent. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, what a dreadful affair!" she exclaimed, sinking into a chair. Poor Mr. Tate, struck down in his prime. I always said he was too nosy for his own good. Poirot tilted his head. "Nosy, madame? In what way?" Mrs. Marwood leaned forward, her eyes alight with gossip. "He was always asking questions about the estate, the accounts, even my late husband's investments. I heard him arguing with Charles, and he was forever whispering with Dr. Walsh. Shady, if you ask me." She lowered her voice. "And there was talk of a scandal years ago, something about a servant. Tate was involved, I'm sure of it." Poirot's interest sharpened, but Mrs. Marwood's details were frustratingly vague, her relish for drama outweighing her precision. Lady Eleanor, when questioned privately, was a study in restrained grief. They met in her study, a room lined with family portraits and heavy with the scent of old books. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady despite her pallor, "I cannot fathom this violence in my home. First the brooch, now Reginald. He was a trusted friend, despite his peculiarities." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Peculiarities, madam?" She hesitated. "He was meticulous, perhaps too much so. Lately, he seemed preoccupied, always scribbling in that ledger of his. I thought it was the strain of his work. But now—" Her voice trailed off, and Poirot sensed her fear of betrayal. "The brooch," he prompted. "You believe its theft is connected?" She nodded. "It was no ordinary theft. The safe's combination is known only to me, Grayson, and Reginald. Someone betrayed my trust." Poirot's mind raced. Tate as thief, or Tate as victim of a larger scheme. Returning to Tate's room, Poirot conducted a second, more thorough search. Beneath a loose floorboard under the rug, he found a small brass key, its design intricate but unfamiliar. It did not fit the safe in Lady Eleanor's study, nor any lock in the room. Its purpose eluded him, but he slipped it into his pocket, certain it was a piece of the puzzle. The ledger, too, yielded further clues. A series of payments marked EM over several years, totaling a significant sum. A code, perhaps? Or initials? Poirot's thoughts turned to the servant scandal Mrs. Marwood had mentioned. Could EM be the key to Tate's secrets? He sought out Grayson, finding the butler polishing silver in the pantry with mechanical precision. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, "you have served the Langstons long. Tell me of this scandal involving a servant some years ago." Grayson's hand paused, his face a mask of loyalty. "It was a delicate matter, sir. A maid, Mary Ellis, was dismissed after Mr. Tate accused her of stealing jewellery. She protested her innocence, but Lady Eleanor had no choice. The girl left for London, I believe." His tone was neutral, but his eyes flickered with unease. Poirot pressed further. "And Mr. Tate, he was certain of her guilt?" Grayson hesitated. "He was insistent, sir, but Mary was a good girl. Some of us doubted the charge." Poirot nodded, the seed of a theory taking root. As the rain intensified, Poirot stood alone in the library, the fire's glow illuminating the dagger's empty case. The threads of motive were emerging. Charles's financial ambitions, thwarted by Tate's objections. Clara's guarded secret, hinted at by Tate's warning. Walsh's evasive alibi and possible collusion. Mrs. Marwood's vague accusations, perhaps masking her own fears. And Lady Eleanor's stolen brooch, a symbol of trust broken. Tate, the solicitor, had been a fulcrum of secrets, his ledger and burned letterproof of hidden dealings. But the key, small, brass and enigmatic, was a cipher Poirot could not yet decode. He resolved to trace the mysterious EM and verify Walsh's alibi, certain that the truth lay in the intersections of greed, fear, and betrayal. The day drew to a close, the rain a relentless curtain beyond the windows. Poirot, his mind alight with possibilities, felt the familiar thrill of the chase. The murder at Rosehill Park was no random act. It was a calculated move in a game of shadows. With his little grey cells at work, he would unravel the motives that bound this household in a web of deceit. Chapter 4. The Shadow of the Past. The rain that had cloaked Rosehill Park in a mournful veil persisted into the afternoon. Its steady patter a counterpoint to the tension simmering within the mansion's walls. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the gloom, stood in the library, his small frame silhouetted against the tall windows as he turned the mysterious brass key over in his gloved fingers. The key, found hidden beneath a floorboard in Reginald Tate's room, was a tantalizing enigma, too delicate for a safe, too ornate for a common lock. Its purpose eluded him, but Poirot's little grey cells hummed with the certainty that it held significance in the tangled web of the solicitor's murder. The burned letter fragment, the cryptic ledger entries, and the whispers of a past scandal all pointed to a motive rooted in secrets long buried. To unravel the truth, Poirot knew he must delve into the shadows of Rosehill's history. He began with a private audience with Lady Eleanor in her study, a room heavy with the weight of tradition. The walls were lined with bookshelves and portraits of Langston forebears, their stern gazes seeming to judge the present turmoil. Lady Eleanor sat behind a mahogany desk, her hands folded, her composure a fragile mask over her distress. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "this tragedy consumes me. Reginald was not just our solicitor, but a friend of decades. To think he met such an end here." She paused, her fingers tightening. Poirot, seated opposite, inclined his head sympathetically. "Madame, I understand your grief, but to find the truth, I must ask of the past. Tell me of this servant, Mary Ellis, dismissed some years ago." Lady Eleanor's eyes flickered, a momentary crack in her poise. "Mary was a maid here, perhaps 7 years ago. She was accused of stealing a pearl necklace, a gift from my late husband. Reginald discovered the theft and insisted on her dismissal. I trusted his judgment, though it pained me. Mary was spirited, but I never thought her dishonest." Her voice wavered, and Poirot noted the hint of doubt. "And where is she now?" he pressed. "London, I believe," Lady Eleanor replied. "She wrote to me once, pleading her innocence, but I did not respond." Her gaze dropped, and Poirot sensed a flicker of guilt. Determined to pursue this lead, Poirot sought out Mr. Grayson, finding him in the servants' hall, overseeing the polishing of crystal with a precision that mirrored Poirot's own. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot began, his tone genial but probing, "you spoke of Mary Ellis with sympathy. Tell me, what was her relationship with Mr. Tate?" The butler's hands stilled, his face a mask of professional restraint. "Mary was a diligent girl, sir, but headstrong. Mr. Tate was severe with her. He claimed to have found the necklace in her room, hidden in a drawer. She swore it was planted, but his word carried weight. After her dismissal, she left in tears, vowing to clear her name." Grayson's voice held a rare edge of indignation. "And did others share your doubts about her guilt?" Poirot asked. Grayson hesitated. "Some of us did, sir. The housekeeper, Mrs. Reed, thought it odd. Mary had no history of deceit, but Mr. Tate was adamant, and Lady Eleanor relied on him." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the butler's loyalty and the possibility that Tate's accusation had been a calculated act. Returning to the library, Poirot examined the estate's records, granted access by Lady Eleanor. The accounts were meticulous, but a pattern emerged. Small, regular payments to an EM over several years, ceasing abruptly 6 months ago. The initials matched Mary Ellis, but the sums, modest yet consistent, suggested something more complex than a servant's wages. Blackmail? Compensation? Poirot's thoughts turned to Tate's ledger, where similar initials appeared alongside larger transactions. He resolved to contact a colleague in London to trace Mary Ellis, suspecting her dismissal held a clue to Tate's murder. The afternoon brought a gathering in the drawing room, where Poirot observed the guests' reactions to a deliberate test. He produced the brass key, holding it aloft as if it were a relic. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice commanding attention. "This key was found in Mr. Tate's room. Does anyone recognize it?" The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Charles Langston's brow furrowed, but he shook his head. Clara Beaumont's eyes widened briefly before she composed herself, murmuring, "I've never seen it." Dr. Walsh adjusted his spectacles, his fingers twitching, a tell Poirot noted with interest. Mrs. Marwood, ever eager, leaned forward. "A key? Oh, it must be to something scandalous." Reginald was always so secretive. Her speculation was unhelpful, but Poirot watched her closely, sensing she knew more than she revealed. Lady Eleanor, last to respond, studied the key with a frown. "It resembles one my husband used for a private box in the attic, but that was lost years ago." Poirot's interest sharpened. The attic would be his next destination. He ventured there alone, climbing a narrow staircase to a dusty, shadowed space filled with trunks and forgotten relics. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and mildew. Using the brass key, he tested several locked boxes, but none yielded. At last, he found a small, iron-bound chest tucked behind a cracked mirror. The key turned with a satisfying click, revealing a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. The handwriting matched the burned fragment from Tate's room, and the contents were damning. Correspondence between Tate and an unnamed party, discussing the undervaluation of estate assets for personal gain. The letters hinted at a partner within the household, but bore no signature. Poirot's pulse quickened. This was evidence of a scheme that Tate had either orchestrated or uncovered, making him a target. Descending to the drawing room, Poirot confronted Charles Langston with the ledger's entries. "Monsieur," he said, his tone deceptively mild, "your initials appear in Mr. Tate's records, tied to a significant sum. Care to explain?" Charles flushed, his voice rising. "That's nonsense. Tate was always scribbling, trying to control me. If my name's there, he forged it to make trouble." His defensiveness was palpable, but Poirot pressed no further, preferring to let suspicion simmer. Clara, overhearing, approached Poirot later, her voice low. "Charles is impulsive, monsieur, but he's no thief. Tate was the one stirring trouble, always hinting at secrets." Her defense of her fiancé was fierce, yet Poirot detected a flicker of fear in her eyes, fear of what Tate might have known about her. Dr. Walsh, when questioned again, was evasive about his late-night activities. "I told you, I was working," he snapped, his usual reserve fraying. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "And yet, doctor, your patient in the village remains a mystery. What kept you awake while a man was murdered?" Walsh's silence was answer enough, and Poirot marked him for closer scrutiny. Mrs. Marwood, meanwhile, cornered Poirot with a fresh rumour. "I heard Tate was in London recently, meeting someone unsavoury. Perhaps that Mary Ellis girl, stirring up old grudges." Her eagerness to deflect suspicion intrigued Poirot, but her information was second-hand, requiring verification. As evening fell, Poirot wandered the estate's grounds, the rain now a faint mist. Near the stables, he overheard a whispered exchange between two maids, one mentioning Tate's meddling in the past. Approaching, he learned from the younger maid, Ellen, that Mary Ellis had been a favourite among the staff. Her dismissal, a shock. "She swore Mr. Tate framed her," Ellen said, glancing nervously. Said he'd pay one day. Poirot's mind raced. Had Mary sought revenge? Or was her story a distraction? He dispatched a telegram to his London contact, requesting details on Mary Ellis's whereabouts and activities. Standing by the rose maze, Poirot reflected on the day's discoveries. The letters in the chest pointed to a financial conspiracy, with Tate at its centre, either as perpetrator or exposer. The brass key had unlocked a fragment of truth, but the initials, E.M., and Mary Ellis's shadow loomed large. Charles's financial woes, Clara's guarded demeanour, Walsh's lies, and Mrs. Marwood's gossip all wove into a tapestry of motive, yet the killer's identity remained elusive. The past, Poirot knew, held the answer, and he would pursue it with the relentless precision that had made him a legend. Chapter 5. The Alibi unravels. The rain had ceased, leaving Rosehill Park shrouded in a damp chill that seemed to seep into the very stones of the mansion. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned against the autumnal bite, stood in the rose garden, his eyes tracing the maze's intricate paths, where Reginald Tate had met his end. The brass key, the burned letter fragment, and the cryptic ledger entries swirled in his mind, each a piece of a puzzle that refused to align. The initials, E.M., and the shadow of Mary Ellis lingered, but Poirot's instincts told him the truth lay closer, within the fraught dynamics of the household. The alibis of the guests, flimsy as gossamer, demanded scrutiny, and Poirot resolved to test their veracity with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He began in the village, a short walk from the estate, where the cobblestone streets and thatched cottages exuded a quaint charm at odds with the morning's violence. Poirot sought out the local chemist, a wiry man named Mr. Finch, to verify Dr. Henry Walsh's claim of preparing notes for a patient. Finch, polishing his spectacles, frowned at the inquiry. Dr. Walsh, he was here around 10 last night, buying a bottle of laudanum. Said it was for a patient with nerves. Didn't mention no visit, though. Poirot's moustache twitched. Walsh had claimed to be in his room, not in the village. The discrepancy was a crack in the doctor's carefully constructed facade, and Poirot intended to widen it. Returning to Rosehill, Poirot found Dr. Walsh in the conservatory, surrounded by lush ferns and the faint scent of earth. The physician's lean frame stiffened as Poirot approached, his spectacles glinting with guarded wariness. "Doctor," Poirot said, his voice deceptively mild, "you told me you were working late on notes for a village patient. Yet I learn you were at the chemist's at 10, procuring laudanum. Why this omission?" Walsh's jaw tightened, his fingers adjusting his glasses, a nervous habit Poirot had come to recognize. "I may have stepped out briefly," he admitted. "The patient needed medication, and I fetched it myself. I returned before midnight." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this patient, they can confirm your story?" Walsh hesitated, a fatal pause. "It was a private consultation. I prefer not to disclose their name." Poirot's smile was thin. "Most convenient, doctor. But the truth, it has a way of revealing itself." He left Walsh visibly shaken, the seed of doubt planted. Next, Poirot turned his attention to Clara Beaumont, whose theatrical poise had intrigued him from the start. He found her in the morning room, flipping through a script, her auburn hair catching the light filtering through the lace curtains. "Mademoiselle," he began, seating himself opposite, "your alibi rests on rehearsing lines alone in your room. Yet a groundskeeper reports seeing a woman near the maze before the murder. A woman with your grace of movement." Clara's fingers paused on the page, her expression a masterful blend of surprise and composure. "A mistake, surely," she said, her voice steady. "I was in my room, as I told you. The script is for a new play, quite absorbing." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze unrelenting. "Then, perhaps, you will indulge me. Recite the lines you practiced that night." Clara's smile faltered. her eyes flickering with unease. "It was a soliloquy," she said, "from a tragedy. I don't recall the exact words now." She attempted a few halting lines, her delivery uncharacteristically stilted. Poirot's silence was damning. "Curious, mademoiselle, that an actress of your skill falters so. What kept you near the maze?" Clara's composure cracked, her voice low. I went to meet Reginald. He'd threatened to expose something from my past, a scandal from my early days on the stage. Nothing criminal, but it could ruin my engagement to Charles. We argued, but I left him alive, I swear." Her eyes glistened, but Poirot noted her hands, steady now, as if the confession had unburdened her. The groundskeeper's sighting, though vague, was a crucial thread. Poirot sought him out near the stables. A grizzled man named Tompkins who smelled of hay and tobacco. I saw a woman," Tompkins confirmed, squinting. "Near the maze's east entrance, just past 11. Couldn't see her face, but she moved quick, like she knew the paths." Clara's admission aligned with the timing, but her claim of leaving Tate alive required corroboration. Poirot returned to the house, his mind turning to the physical evidence. He requested to examine Walsh's medical bag, suspecting the laudanum purchase held significance. Inspector Harrow, grumbling but compliant, arranged for the bag to be brought to the library. Among the vials and instruments, Poirot found a small bottle of aconite, a potent poison rarely used in legitimate practice. Walsh, summoned, paled at the discovery. "It's for experimental treatments," he stammered. "I've never used it." Poirot's eyebrow arched. "Yet you carry it, Doctor, in a house where a man was murdered. Most interesting." The aconite, though unused, suggested preparation or a contingency plan. Poirot's thoughts returned to the dagger, now in Harrow's custody. He examined it under a magnifying glass, noting a faint smudge on the handle, possibly a fingerprint obscured by handling. The blade's precision intrigued him. It required strength and skill, qualities Walsh, as a physician, possessed. Clara, too, with her stage training, could wield a prop dagger convincingly, but the absence of blood or struggle suggested a single, calculated strike. Poirot paced the library, reconstructing the murder. Tate, lured to the maze under a pretext, struck down by someone he trusted enough to meet alone. The killer's knowledge of the maze's layout was undeniable, narrowing the suspects to those intimate with Rosehill. He sought out Mrs. Violet Marwood, whose gossip had proven both irritating and illuminating. She was in the drawing room, embroidering with exaggerated delicacy. "Madame Marwood," Poirot said, his tone courteous but firm. "You hinted at Mr. Tate's recent trip to London. What do you know of his purpose?" Mrs. Marwood's needle paused, her eyes gleaming with a thrill of intrigue. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, I heard he was meeting someone, a woman perhaps. There was talk of old debts, or maybe revenge. He was always so secretive, you know." Her vagueness frustrated Poirot, but he pressed gently. "And this woman, you believe it was Mary Ellis?" Mrs. Marwood shrugged, her smile coy. "Who else? She had reason to hate him after what he did." Poirot noted her eagerness to point fingers, wondering if it masked her own fears or knowledge. A telegram from Poirot's London contact arrived that afternoon, confirming Mary Ellis's whereabouts. She was now a seamstress, working in a modest theatre, and had been performing in a play the night of the murder, her alibi corroborated by multiple witnesses. The trail to Mary grew cold, but her story lingered in Poirot's mind. Had Tate framed her to cover his own misdeeds? The letters from the attic chest suggested a financial scheme, and Poirot suspected Tate's accusations against Mary had been a diversion, perhaps to protect a larger deception. As dusk settled, Poirot stood by the maze, the roses now shadowed and silent. The alibis were unravelling. Walsh's lie about his village visit, Clara's admission of meeting Tate, the aconite in Walsh's bag, and the groundskeeper's sighting. Yet the brass key and the ledger's EM remained unsolved riddles. Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the motives: Clara's fear of exposure, Walsh's potential blackmail, Charles's financial desperation, and the lingering echo of Mary Ellis's disgrace. The killer, he knew, was among them, their masks slipping with each false step. With a final glance at the maze, Poirot returned to the house, determined to tighten the net around the truth. Chapter 6. The Key to the Truth. The twilight at Rosehill Park draped the estate in a sombre hush, the rose maze now a silhouette against the fading light. Hercule Poirot, his mind a whirl of deductions, stood in the library, the brass key from Reginald Tate's room resting in his palm like a talisman. Its intricate design, too delicate for a safe yet too purposeful for mere ornament, taunted him. The burned letter fragment, the ledger's cryptic EM, and Clara Beaumont's tearful confession of meeting Tate in the maze had tightened the web of suspicion. But the truth remained elusive. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with the certainty that the key, both literal and metaphorical, would unlock the motive behind Tate's murder. He resolved to test every lock, literal and figurative, until the puzzle yielded. Poirot began with the estate's lesser-known corners, suspecting the key's purpose lay in a forgotten nook. He explored the cellars, the servants' quarters, and the greenhouse, but the key fit no lock. At last, he recalled Lady Eleanor's mention of her late husband's private box in the attic, though she believed its key lost. Returning to the attic, he searched beyond the iron-bound chest he had opened previously, finding a small, locked cabinet hidden behind a tapestry. The brass key turned smoothly, revealing a cache of documents, ledgers, deeds, and a single photograph of a young woman with defiant eyes, labelled M.E. 1918. Mary Ellis, perhaps. The documents detailed land transactions, some bearing Tate's initials alongside Charles Langston's, hinting at a scheme to sell estate parcels at undervalued prices. One letter, unsigned but in the same looping script as the burned fragment read: "The profits must be secured before CL acts rashly." Poirot's pulse quickened. Tate had been entangled in a conspiracy, but was he mastermind or pawn? He confronted Charles Langston in the billiard room, where the young man was idly striking balls, his face drawn with tension. "Monsieur Langston," Poirot said, his voice sharp as a blade, "your initials appear in documents suggesting a plot to defraud the estate. Mr. Tate was involved, non? Explain yourself." Charles's cue clattered to the floor, his eyes flashing with panic. "That's a lie. Tate was always scribbling, trying to pin something on me. If my name's there, he forged it to cover his own schemes. I wanted to sell land, yes, but legally, nothing underhanded." His voice cracked, and Poirot noted his desperation. "And yet," Poirot pressed, "Tate opposed your plans. Did he threaten to expose you?" Charles's fists clenched. "We argued, but I didn't kill him. I was in my room, as I told you." Poirot's gaze lingered, unconvinced. Charles's denials were fervent, but his financial straits hinted at in Tate's ledger suggested a motive. Clara Beaumont, found in the conservatory, was next. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely, her eyes weary from the day's strain. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, "you admitted to meeting Mr. Tate in the maze, fearing his threats about your past. What did he know?" Clara's fingers twisted a handkerchief, her actress's poise faltering. "It was a scandal years ago. A director I worked with was arrested for fraud. I was young, naive, and briefly implicated, though cleared. Tate dug it up, said it would ruin Charles if it came out. I begged him to stay silent, but he was cruel. I left him alive, monsieur. I swear." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held Poirot's, daring him to doubt her. He nodded, noting her sincerity but also her agility, stage-trained, capable of navigating the maze unseen. Dr. Henry Walsh, summoned to the library, was increasingly defensive. Poirot confronted him with the aconite vial. "Doctor, you carry a poison rarely used in medicine. Why?" Walsh's spectacles glinted as he snapped, "It's for research, as I said. I'm no murderer." Poirot's smile was disarming. "Yet you lied about your whereabouts, and a witness places you near the house at midnight. Did you meet Tate, perhaps to discuss his schemes?" Walsh's face reddened. "I saw him briefly, yes, near the gardens. He was agitated, said someone was pressuring him. I left him there, alive." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Walsh's admission placed him closer to the crime scene, but his story was too vague to trust. Mrs. Violet Marwood, ever the eager gossip, approached Poirot in the hall, her fan fluttering. "Monsieur Poirot, I've remembered something. Tate was in London last month, meeting a woman, likely that Mary Ellis. He came back nervous, always looking over his shoulder." Poirot, weary of her theatrics, pressed for specifics. "And you know this how, madame?" she faltered. "I overheard him on the telephone arranging it. He mentioned settling an old debt." Poirot filed this away, though Mrs. Marwood's penchant for embellishment made her unreliable. Still, her mention of London aligned with his earlier inquiries. A second telegram from Poirot's London contact arrived, confirming Mary Ellis's alibi. She had been on stage until midnight, then at a cast party until dawn, ruling her out as the killer. Yet her photograph in the attic cabinet suggested a deeper connection to Tate's schemes. Poirot hypothesized that Tate's accusation against her years ago had been a ploy to deflect suspicion from his own misdeeds, perhaps tied to the land deals. The initials EM in the ledger could be a red herring or a clue to another player. Poirot returned to the maze, retracing the path to the clearing where Tate had died. The roses, now drooping under their own weight, seemed to whisper secrets. He examined the ground again, finding a faint scuff mark near the east entrance, overlooked by Inspector Harrow's men. It suggested a hurried exit, perhaps by someone familiar with the maze's twists. Clara's confession and Walsh's late-night wandering pointed to them, but Charles's financial motive and Lady Eleanor's stolen brooch loomed large. Poirot's mind turned to the dagger's precision, a single, expert strike. Walsh's medical skill fit, but so did Clara's stage training with props. The key, he mused, might unlock more than a cabinet. It could reveal the killer's intent. As night fell, Poirot stood in the library, the fire casting long shadows. The documents from the attic, Clara's tearful admission, Walsh's lies, and Charles's denials formed a constellation of clues, but the centre remained obscure. He resolved to stage a final gathering, to press the suspects until the truth emerged. The key to the truth, both brass and intellectual, was within his grasp, and Poirot would wield it with the finesse of a maestro conducting a symphony of justice. Chapter 7. The Gathering of Suspects. The air in Rosehill Park's library was thick with anticipation, the firelight casting flickering shadows across the oak-panelled walls as Hercule Poirot assembled the household for a reckoning. The rain had returned, a soft drumming against the windows that underscored the gravity of the moment. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small frame commanding, his eyes gleaming with the clarity of a man who had glimpsed the truth, the brass key, the attic documents, Clara's confession, Walsh's lies, and the ledger's cryptic entries had woven a tapestry of deceit, and now Poirot would unravel it. The suspects, Lady Eleanor, Charles Langston, Clara Beaumont, Dr. Henry Walsh, and Mrs. Violet Marwood, sat in a semicircle, their faces a study in unease, each guarding secrets Poirot was determined to expose. He began with a theatrical flourish, holding aloft the sapphire brooch, recovered that afternoon from a hidden compartment in Tate's suitcase, discovered during a second search prompted by a hunch. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot declared, his voice resonant, "this brooch, stolen from Madame Langton's safe, was found among Mr. Tate's possessions. It was no ordinary theft, non. It was a distraction, a veil to obscure a greater crime. Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand rising to her throat, while Charles's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to Clara. Walsh adjusted his spectacles, a nervous tick, and Mrs. Marwood leaned forward, her fan stilled. Clara alone remained composed, though her fingers gripped the armrest. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the rug. The murder of Mr. Reginald Tate was not about the brooch, though it played its part. It was about silence, silencing a man who knew too much. Let us consider the motives. He turned to Charles. Monsieur Langston, you clashed with Tate over your plans to sell estate land. His opposition threatened your financial salvation, oui? And the documents in the attic, bearing your initials, suggest a scheme to defraud. Charles leapt to his feet, his face flushed. I told you, Poirot, those were forgeries. Tate was the crook, not me. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Perhaps, monsieur, but your temper, it betrays you. He faced Clara next, his gaze piercing. Mademoiselle Beaumont, you admitted to meeting Tate in the maze, fearing his threats to expose your past. Your skill as an actress, it could navigate the maze unseen, and your training with stage props, perhaps a dagger. Clara's eyes widened, but her voice was steady. I argued with him, yes, but I didn't kill him. I left him alive. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, letting her words hang in the air. Dr. Walsh was next, his lean frame rigid. Doctor, your lies about your whereabouts, the aconite in your bag, and your presence near the gardens at midnight place you close to the crime. Your medical skill could deliver a precise, fatal strike. Walsh's voice was sharp. I've explained myself, Poirot. I met Tate briefly, yes, but I didn't harm him. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Yet the truth, Doctor, it slips through your fingers. Mrs. Marwood, eager to deflect, interjected. What about that Mary Ellis? Tate ruined her, and she hated him for it. Poirot turned to her, his tone cutting. Madame, your gossip is plentiful, but your facts are few. Mary Ellis was in London, her alibi confirmed. She is not our killer. Mrs. Marwood flushed, sinking back into her chair. Poirot addressed Lady Eleanor last. Madame, your trust in Tate was betrayed by his theft of the brooch, perhaps to fund his schemes. But did you suspect his deeper betrayals? Lady Eleanor's eyes glistened. I trusted him, monsieur. If he was false, I was blind. Poirot nodded, sensing her sincerity, but noting her access to the dagger's display case. He paused, letting the tension build, then revealed his final clue. In Dr. Walsh's coat, I found a rose petal, bruised, from the unique variety in the maze's clearing. Proof he was there at the time of the murder. Walsh blanched, his voice rising. That's impossible. I wasn't. Poirot cut him off, his voice like steel. You were, Doctor. You met Tate, not briefly, but with intent. The documents in the attic reveal a scheme to defraud the estate, with Tate as your partner. When he threatened to expose you, fearing his own ruin, you acted. You lured him to the maze, knowing its paths from your years here, and struck with the precision of a surgeon. Walsh's composure shattered. No, I only wanted my share. Tate was going to betray me. Tell Eleanor everything. I had to stop him. His confession spilled forth, a torrent of panic. He had planned to use the aconite, but chose the dagger for its swiftness, believing his medical knowledge would deflect suspicion. The brooch's theft, he admitted, was Tate's idea, a distraction to muddy the waters. Inspector Harrow, standing by the door, stepped forward, his cuffs ready. That's enough, Dr. Walsh. You're under arrest. Walsh slumped, defeated, as the room exhaled its collective tension. Poirot, his eyes calm, surveyed the scene. The truth, as always, had emerged through the meticulous work of his little grey cells. Chapter 8. the order restored. The storm had passed, leaving Rosehill Park bathed in the pale light of a new dawn, the roses glistening as if cleansed of the previous day's horrors. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his suitcase packed, his moustache impeccably groomed, ready to depart for London. The arrest of Dr. Henry Walsh had lifted the pall of suspicion from the estate, though the air still carried the weight of betrayal. The household, shaken but relieved, gathered to bid Poirot farewell, their faces a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. Lady Eleanor, her poise restored, clasped his hand, her eyes conveying a depth of thanks words could not capture. Poirot, with a slight bow, prepared to leave, his mind already reflecting on the intricate dance of human motives that had unfolded. The previous evening's confrontation in the library had been a triumph of deduction. Walsh's confession, his admission of luring Tate to the maze, striking with the stolen dagger, and planting the brooch to mislead, had unravelled the mystery with the precision Poirot cherished. The doctor's motive, rooted in greed and fear of exposure, had driven him to silence Tate, whose own duplicity in the estate's financial schemes had made him a dangerous liability. The brass key, unlocking the attic cabinet, had revealed the documents that sealed Walsh's fate, exposing his role in the fraud. The rose petal, a delicate clue overlooked by all but Poirot, had placed him at the scene, a testament to the little grey cell's relentless scrutiny. Lady Eleanor, in a private moment before Poirot's departure, expressed her sorrow. "Monsieur Poirot, I was blind to Reginald's faults and Henry's betrayal. Your clarity has saved us." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, the human heart is a labyrinth, but truth, it finds its way." Charles Langston, chastened by the ordeal, vowed to abandon his reckless plans for the estate, his hand resting on Clara's, who offered a tentative smile. Clara, cleared of suspicion, spoke softly to Poirot. "I feared my past would destroy me, but you saw the truth. Thank you." Even Mrs. Violet Marwood, subdued for once, murmured her admiration, though Poirot suspected she would soon spin the tale into gossip. As the chauffeur drove him to the station, Poirot gazed at the receding spires of Rosehill Park, the rose maze a distant blur. The case had been a study in contrasts, elegance and deceit, loyalty and treachery. The brooch, returned to Lady Eleanor, symbolised trust restored, but Poirot knew the scars of betrayal would linger. He mused on the fragility of human honour, how greed could twist even the most disciplined mind, as it had Walsh's. The train's whistle sounded, and Poirot boarded, settling into his seat with a sigh of satisfaction. Order, as always, had been restored through the meticulous work of his intellect.